Here we go. So I've called this from Masterplan to delivery. I mean, this is a work in progress at Barton Park. As you say, as Kevin said, a number of you may have or have helped with this. Nick Falk and David were involved in this at a point in time. And I just wanted to talk you through how this site has been set up. So how Grosvenor and Oxford City Council worked together on this one, how that master plan has been put in place and our thought process, and some pictures of how we're actually getting on there. It's not finished yet, we're about halfway through, but hopefully you'll get a feel for how it's developing. So I'll talk to the site context in a second. Quite an interesting part of Oxford, for those who know Oxford. The JV that we've got there and the sort of ethos behind that, some of those key design features, and then we'll move on to progress and some of the challenges we've had over time. So a little bit about Grosvenor. I mean, Grosvenor's probably famed slightly more for Mayfair and Belgravia, those two estates that are owned by the company, a £5 billion portfolio in London, but increasingly been looking at large master plan schemes outside of London over time. So whether it's stuff we did up in Liverpool sort of 10 years ago, or what is now an increasing focus for the business, which is strategic land. So we're trying to triple the size of our strategic land portfolio over the next few years. So any big sites, do give me a call, keep me in a job for a while. So a little bit about Barton. So we got involved here going back probably 2011, and our patch where we think we can add some value and we can work pretty well is in that Oxford Cambs corridor, probably before the Arc was really mentioned. We've been doing lots in Cambridge for years, for about 30 years we've been doing stuff up there, and we thought Oxford would be just the same as Cambridge. It would be an absolutely simple process to sort of apply the logic we used in Cambridge and apply it to Oxford. We were completely wrong. And we got involved here on this site just north of the Ring Road, one of the last sites that Oxford's within Oxford City at any particular scale, other than the stuff around the train station that Nick talked about earlier. Had been knocking around for a while. It marks the boundary between the green belt to the north. If I had a pointer, I'd show you here, but it's a sort of green space between the urban settlement and north of the A40, where South Oxfordshire meets the city. So quite a contentious part of that region, for those of you who know the politics. And a interesting dynamic in terms of if you're new to coming to Oxford, house price in Oxford is seen expensive, the most unaffordable city at varying times within the UK, but also an area with quite diverse economic backgrounds for people. So Barton, which is the existing estate to the east here, is one of the most deprived estates in the country, not let alone Oxfordshire. And if you have the I won't say misfortune, but if you live in Barton, you will live 10 years on average less than if you live across the road in Headington. So quite stark sort of economics and health outcomes within this area. Northway, across the A40, a little bit better, but some similar statistics. And the challenge here for us was how do we develop sort of thick end of 900 homes here, market and affordable, but integrate these communities. So just a few stats in terms of what I'm going to talk about, just so you can get a picture of the sort of scale. So yeah, as I said, thick end of 900 homes here, 40% affordable housing, 100% of that is social rented, to be owned by Oxford City Council. We've picked up a couple of awards along the way. Terence O'Rourke have done the master planning for us. And some of the sort of stats of what we've delivered here, new primary school coming on board, and a number of different public open spaces which we'll look at. One of the sort of novel factors, I think, in terms of this project versus some others is the structure and the aims of this particular sort of land ownership structure, which has enabled us to do some of what we've tried to do here. So Oxford City Council were the owners of this land. They wanted to procure a partner to take it forward and went down a investment partnership route where they put the land into a JV, essentially at sort of nominal value. We come along, fund everything here. We've put about 55 million quid in, and provide the development expertise and act as master developer for the site. So quite an interesting model that some have started to look at as an interesting way the public sector can bring on board the private sector to develop out schemes. And the sort of fundamentals of how this has been a success to date is about setting the clear objectives from the start. So Oxford City had a very clear objective as what they wanted to achieve. It wasn't far off what we want to do, but there are some points of difference inevitably. So they were very keen about maximising the delivery of affordable homes. That was an absolute non-negotiable, and that is social rent. They wanted to maximise the delivery of homes as a whole. So whilst we've got an outline consent for a number of different uses, maxing out the number of homes is vitally important for them in a constrained city. We set ourselves, an overused word, but set ourselves a target of this being an exemplar development. So really trying to use best practice where we can and looked at all the sort of schemes that everyone else goes to try and make that a reality. But fundamentally, we're a commercial developer ourselves, so maximising the financial return for both parties was in there. So an interesting balance to try and square. So we set ourselves this early vision. I think Nick Folk might have written this, but I can't remember. A garden suburb. This is sort of trying to relate to the last edge of the urban form before it then meets the green belt and green open space. High quality urban living at its heart, really, and really trying to have something that has a clear identity, something that is of Oxford, but has its own identity in an interesting location. So how do we go about sort of setting that tone after that? So we set about a number of placemaking objectives. So when we started looking around the best the UK had to offer, we did all the study trips to Europe, etc. We was trying to boil down what we saw and what we needed to implement in this particular scheme. So the joint venture controlling what gets delivered here. So we act as master developer. We are delivering infrastructure. We are working with the planning system, but also layering on our own quality standards above that, and then controlling what gets delivered by the house builders and really being pretty finicky about that process. Looking at how the community works. So you've got a community with particular characteristics next to it at Barton and Northway, and then you're introducing 900 homes into that mix. How is that actually going to work? How does that integrate between those different housing tenures that we're introducing, but also the ones that are adjacent to it? Parking, driving cars, how do we tackle that problem that's Oxford, as with many cities, but probably one of the worst for being snarled up with traffic. Landscaping, really important how this sort of continuation of the urban edge then almost finishes and addresses the rest of the open space and essentially the green belt that it looks onto, and looking at those hierarchy of streets, so that having a walkable neighbourhood that we can encourage cycling and walking rather than use of the car, but still getting buses and things like that into the scheme. So from that sort of high level principle, we then adopted a lot of those principles and put them into a design code, as many of you will have done on other schemes, but really looking at trying to steal the best ideas from other developments across the world and certainly in the UK, and try and turn them into an Oxford context, and taking those examples, really embedding them in that design code so that although we're there, the planners have got something to use as well as a sort of yardstick of quality as we move through. So, part of the key themes here, traditional form of building, but with a contemporary feel to it. Looking at biodiversity, this was greenfields before we started, and ultimately aiming for a net biodiversity gain, which we've achieved, thankfully, on the land that we've left green and parks that we've put in, and real concentration on those sort of safe and attractive streets that we wanted to instill. So early days of the master planning process. I think David referenced, these master plans get fixed, and then someone comes along and ruins them at the end. We make your judgment later whether we've ruined it yet. But these are the early ideas. So this shows you the connectivity really of Barton, Northway, slightly more run-down areas of Oxford, then Headington, pretty wealthy. And how do we cross this quite real hard border of the A40? And so in the early days, this was about having density going towards the A40, lower density to the north, fronting the green space, but making sure that we punctuated the development with plenty of interaction with these neighbourhoods as best we can. And in particular, looking at how we crossed the A40 in a couple of different instances. However, transport and access was, a big issue for us, and fundamentally, I think I saw Jason from the County Council earlier, so he was very helpful in this process. But we were unsuccessful in terms of being able to make more crossings on that A40. I think from our perspective, we saw slowing down the A40 from 70 miles an hour down to 30 miles an hour, and creating some sort of boulevard there would improve the atmosphere on our particular site and how it addresses it, but also be a benefit to all those neighbouring neighbourhoods as well. We didn't pull that off. We ended up with one major access onto the A40 and a connecting spine road that then joined us into Barton. And that was just the sort of dynamics of how transport around Oxford, that being the main ring road, worked, and we probably threw everything at that, but didn't quite get there. What we were successful in was bringing the speed limit down from 70 down to 50. So that has improved the atmosphere, and we spent an awful lot of time looking at how that junction can work. So this was the master plan we ended up with. So care of the good chaps at Terence O'Rourke. So most of this sort of green, what we call green fingers running through the development were existing already. So we maintained essentially all the hedgerows that we could, and put in a sort of long and thin linear park to the north, existing allotment space. Other constraints that we've handily penciled in here. Green here is a great big SSE substation in the middle, which looks like a park, but it isn't. It's just a load of pylons. But dealing with those constraints and working around it was part of the challenges of bringing the scheme together. So through that process, we could see there was going to be, whilst there's only 900 units, it's a 90-acre site. There's a big step down from how you deal with that entrance round to Barton. So we had a number of, or 3 different neighbourhood areas. So a high density first phase here, the entrance to the scheme, something that was sort of 5-6 story, really ratcheting up the density for that entrance area. And then moving through the scheme, a sort of middle phase of more predominantly housing, but still with some degree of density to it. And then, neighbourhood 3 here facing Barton, so the existing estate, pretty low density, and it's how you step it down from the higher density area to the low density area has been one of the challenges through that. All of that sort of concept of quality of what we wanted to deliver was enshrined in that design code. We've delivered all the public realm here, but this has been concentrated on through the design code really to help the house builders as they come on board. So where we've controlled and delivered most of that space, when the house builders come on board, the idea is that they can see what we're aspiring to. It's in the design code. There is a maths applications have to respond to that. And similarly, in terms of the design, we've not been prescriptive about how people design those homes, but giving them some guidance that, we're looking for some response to how Oxford has been put together. There's quite a variety of housing in Oxford, and also keeping a sort of making a house look like a house, but also having a contemporary feel to them as we flow through. Back in 2016, the NHS were kind enough to endorse our master plan by giving us healthy new town status. And we were probably the most advanced site when the NHS selected, I think, about 10 sites in the first round. And that was a really interesting process. Essentially, the NHS were looking for the type of master plan we'd put in place. So something that responded to the green open spaces, something that had a sort of healthy walking neighbourhood, and that sort of health inequality between the sort of upper end of the economic spectrum in Oxford, and then the relationship with Barton has been really interesting. So we've had funding come through from the NHS which we've diverted through to the existing estate in Barton to help with that connectivity. So we didn't have any residents ready yet. There's been a number of sort of health eating initiatives, etc., which in the grand scheme of what we were trying to do on our site was beneficial to the wider area. So sort of moving on to delivery a little bit here. So this is the phasing plan for the scheme that we had at outline consent stage, and as you can see, denser towards the west, less dense towards the east, and you'll start to see how this has been sort of come to fruition. So these are sort of as of a couple of months ago. We've delivered all the infrastructure here up front before the first residents moved in. That's involved spine road through the centre of the site, new linear park, suds ponds, massive new drainage system, and the junctions onto the A40. This is the park in its current state, so we're probably about 60, 70 residents in at the moment. And luckily this park has started to mature quite nicely. So as those guys and Hill, the first house builder, started to build and people started to move in, then that park has started to mature. That's a brand new suds pond, probably 2 years in. Equally, we've put the sports pitches in. These are a really important part of the new community and how we've engaged with Barton. This is going to be run by the local sports clubs that existed already within Barton. And housing is starting to be delivered. So this is phase one, done by Hill, PTE, and Alison Brooks designed this. So a combination of higher density housing at the gateway, and low density family housing fronting the park. This is sort of the Alison Brooks stuff. So pretty contemporary, but we're really pleased with what's coming out there. Here we go, sort of live shot. So quite dense blocks at the front there, fronting the A40. Phase two is the low density stuff next to Barton. And this is going to come forward with Redrow, and Redrow, this is not standard heritage range stuff from those guys. This is, I can just a few sniggers there. CZWG architects have done this for them, and we shall see how that comes out on the ground, but we're pretty pleased with what we've got Redrow to do there. And key challenges really to sort of finalise. Designing with the A40, that was a big concern with us. How close do you move those blocks to the A40? What's that space really going to be like? That's up and built now, and actually if you stand there, it's not bad at all. That space is perfectly livable. It provides a bit of acoustic barrier inevitably to the rest of the scheme, but actually it is a pretty livable space. Integrating the rest of the communities, we will see how that pans out. We are just about connecting into Barton now. When that scheme gets built out as a whole, it'll be interesting to see how that actually flows through. But in terms of public opposition, I think we had like 2 major oppositions for the outline consent, and everyone else has been pretty on board with it. So far, pretty good. Affordable housing mix. So we've got this 40% affordable housing, 100% social rent. Again, time will tell how that pans out. We've looked to cluster that through the development, and it's working well so far. The housing design aspirations, we set a really high bar for ourselves here, and I think Hill have stepped up to the mark, and as have Redrow. We've tried to make that something that's commercial for the house builders, but at the same time just trying to push on that agenda of quality of housing. The school, the County Council will deliver the school on this site, and it will be open in September 2020. We've struggled a little bit, I think, to bring the county with us on that level of design, and there's been some progress there, but we shall see how that works out. But I think that's one of the lessons learned we've had in terms of paying over Section 106 check to the county to deliver a school. Great, we don't have to build it, but I think on reflection, perhaps we should have brought that one in-house, dealt with it ourselves. And net biodiversity gain. So as a company, we have now committed to net biodiversity gain on all our Stratland projects. We've delivered it here at Barton, so this is the first one we've actually sort of gone and done the stats, tick the box there, which we're very pleased about, and look forward to doing it on some more projects. Thank you very much.